Susan Ford Bales, Mike Ford, Andrea Mitchell, Lynda Johnson Robb, and former First Lady and Secretary Hillary Rodham Clinton. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Liesl Litzenberger Meijer, chair of this year's First Ladies Luncheon.
Thank you. I'll wait till our guests are seated. Welcome. Good afternoon, and welcome to Frederik Meijer Gardens and Sculpture Park. Welcome to the 6th annual America's First Ladies in Enduring Legacy Luncheon. This is a centennial celebration as we mark 100 years of First Lady Betty Ford's legacy. And as every year, it is both an honor and a privilege to stand before you for this event and to thank all of you for the wonderful outpouring of support and love for this centennial celebration. We are exceedingly grateful for the overwhelmingly enthusiastic response and interest. I think we could have filled this room 4 times more, but we have an intimate gathering, right? And it speaks volumes both to the legacy of Mrs. Ford and also to the generosity and character of our honored guests today. 4 exceedingly accomplished, insightful, and completely original women who paused everything in their own very, very busy lives to be here today, to be part of this meaningful conversation, a glimpse into the lives led as First Ladies, First Families, leaders, and thinkers that we all will be graced in hearing shortly. It means so much, truly. It also speaks to all of you. So thank you for being present today. For you are here to support and honor Mrs. Ford and all she did so well and learned and taught all of us, so much ahead of her own time in so many ways. She fostered clear and open discussion, an honest and forthright sharing of her own life, and made the lives of those around her, those who came after her, those who followed her own, all the better for it. Legacy is part of what we talk about when we talk about first families, first ladies. And legacy, I feel, can be a tricky word. It's both a gift and perhaps at times a burden. Being heir to a legacy, being part of the first family, being first lady, so much must both be expected and also self-created. These are women who must define and hold themselves to their own paths. If you look at historically, each and every first lady paving her own path, but do so in a way watched by millions and millions, billions of people. And so we are honored today to be able to hear from the very women who have defined these roles historically and forever. First Lady Betty Ford chose to say things out loud. I have breast cancer, when no one was really saying this. She chose to say, I have struggled with addiction, when no one really wanted to talk about that subject. And in doing so, she chose to share her life. And in this simple yet completely profound act of bravery, she paved the way for all of us who followed her. The women with us today have lived life, the life that we are discussing, First Lady, First Family, and have changed women's lives around the globe forever because of this. We have some very special other guests with us today before I introduce our other exceedingly special guests. You're all special. Pats on the back to you all. Michael Ford. Michael? Ambassador Peter Secchio. And now we come to royalty. We do not have a monarchy here in the United States, of course, but in Michigan we do have Motown royalty. We have Motown royalty. And here today we are graced with a member of Motown royalty. So later if you feel like dancing in the streets or if you have nowhere to run, you may find Ms. Martha Reeves. And finally, you may find the biographies of our four featured, exceedingly honored guests in your program. So I won't belabor that because their personages, their biographies, their lives speak for themselves. And so I will simply introduce them to you. My talk will be followed by an invocation, by a song, and then an invocation, luncheon, and then discussion with our honored guests. Our first guest, Andrea Mitchell. Andrea? Lynda Johnson Robb. Susan Ford Bales. Secretary Clinton. Again, thank you all so much for being present. I'm looking forward to a wonderful program, and it is because of all of you and our guests. I will see you again at the close of our program. Thank you so much for being here.
Please welcome Grand Rapids Police Officer Wally Tett, accompanied by pianist Troy Reynolds, to sing one of Mrs. Ford's favorite songs, What I Did for Love.
Kiss today goodbye. The sweetness and the sorrow. Wish me luck the same to you. I can't forget what I did for love. What I did for love. Look, my eyes are dry. The gift was ours to borrow. It's as if we always knew, but I won't forget what I did for love, what I did for love. Gone, love is never gone as we travel on. Love is what we remember. Kiss today goodbye. Sweetness and the sorrow. We did what we had to do. Can't forget, won't regret what I did for love. kiss today goodbye and point me toward tomorrow. We did what we had to do, and I won't forget what I did for love, what I did for love. Gone, love is never gone as we travel on. Love's what will remember. Kiss today goodbye and point me toward tomorrow. We did what we had to do. I can't forget what I did for love, what I did for love. God, love is never gone as we travel on. Love's what will remember. Kiss today goodbye and point me toward tomorrow. We did what we had to do, and I won't forget what I did for love, what I did for love.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Reverend Zachariah Char, who will give the luncheon invocation.
Good afternoon, honors guests, Secretary Clinton, Susan Ford Bales, Lynda Johnson Robb, and Andrea Mitchell, and to each every one of you gathering here on this grand day in Grand Rapids, Michigan. Ladies and gentlemen, our gathering here today exemplifies the love and a hope with a whole for everyone. It is possible that we all come from different places, that we practice different values and live by different beliefs. Today, each of us contribute to this special moment, to join hands and thoughts in our hearts, united in a gratitude to honor and celebrate the memory and life's work of the great First Lady, Mrs. Betty Ford. She accomplished tremendous work during her lifetime for the common good of this nation. She sacrificed herself to serve others. She sought sharing her life story so that she might help others in this life. She supported her family always and her husband to utmost in leading this nation to where we are today. Mrs. Betty Ford's work is unforgettable from generation to come. We will never forget all she did to change our world, and we must carry on this work ourselves in her memories. God did not just grant freedom to the American people from heaven, but through committed people like Mrs. Betty Ford, who thought day and night about the future of the United States of America. Even though she's not present physically with us today, her legacy will continue in her memories as a life inside of us and in our own work indeed. Today, we are thankful for the freedom to speak freely that we celebrate with all of you. In some part of the world, the freedom to speak is very limited. You must be from a certain community or a certain race. In some part of the world, many people have no future. They have no dreams, no hope, because their leaders put their interests first. We are thankful for the dream, hope, and plan that has been nourished in this community, in this country of the United States of America, like the people, First Lady Betty Ford. In her honesty and goodness, she brought hope to so many people. In some other nation where many have no community, we are very thankful for so many true friends in our community of the United States. Today is a day of sharing in friendship. A true friend is someone who always be with you, even in the hardest of time. A friend is the one who helps you to never lose hope, even in a day of devastation and destruction. A friend helps to keep our faith whole. A friend helps dreams. Mrs. Ford was such a friend indeed. We are thankful to the fathers and the mothers of this country for their hard work in putting first the best interests of their children and of the nation, and not their own. We are very thankful for many friends, so many of you here today, and for special guests and world leaders who have come to celebrate with us this day. As we go on from this blessing day, our gratitude will grow in peace for each and every one of us to have a freedom to live and work and perform a good services throughout of our days. May each of us find joy in your faith and in your services, and may you find the love that comes with the faith in serving others. May you believe in power within yourself to do what is right, to think of others, and who may need your help, who may need a friend. It is my wish for all of you that we may all one day see a world of peace and strength of all that is good. I believe that this gathering is proof that this is possible. I believe we are all together living through this dream and of this hope. For the meal we are about to eat, for those who prepare it for us, and for those who contribute to it, and for those whom we are about to share it, we are thankful for this day. Amen.
Ladies and gentlemen, please enjoy your lunch.
Test.
Ladies and gentlemen, the program is about to begin. Please remain in your seats and silence all electronic devices. A reminder, due to heightened security and the safety and courtesy of all of our guests, you must remain in your seats from 1:15 p.m. until you are notified that the program has ended. We thank you for your cooperation and hope that you enjoy today's program. Now we ask that you please turn your attention to the large overhead screens. We hope you enjoy our video tribute to First Lady Betty Ford in honor of her centennial birthday.
Elizabeth Ann Bloomer was born in Chicago on April 8, 1918. When she was 2, the family moved to Grand Rapids, Michigan, where she graduated from Central High School in 1936 and then attended the Bennington School of Dance. It was there she met American dance icon Martha Graham. She entered Martha Graham's dance school in New York City and performed with the Martha Graham Auxiliary Group in Carnegie Hall. Quite an auspicious beginning for a Midwestern girl in her early 20s. In 1941, Betty Bloomer returned to Grand Rapids, where she anticipated following her interests, finding a hard-working man, getting married, having children, and participating in the American dream. She did all that. The hard-working man she found would later become the 38th President of the United States. In the early 40s, Betty worked as a fashion coordinator for a Grand Rapids department store. She also pursued her love of dance and formed her own group where she taught dance to children with disabilities. In 1947, she was introduced to a young Navy lieutenant commander and lawyer who had come home to Grand Rapids following his World War II service in the South Pacific. The young man was Gerald R. Ford Jr. The couple became engaged in early 1948 and were later married on October 15th of that year. Between their engagement and marriage, Gerald Ford ran a successful primary campaign for a GOP seat in the U.S. House. He eventually won the general election. In January of 1949, the couple moved to the nation's capital, where Betty joined the Congressional Wives Club, helped answer mail in the congressman's office, and conducted tours of Capitol Hill and Mount Vernon for Michigan constituents. In 1950, Betty gave birth to Michael Gerald Ford, the first of their 4 children. 2 years later, John Gardner Ford was born. And by 1957, Michael and John had a brother, Stephen, and a sister, Susan. In the mid-1960s, Congressman Ford was gaining national visibility as a Republican leader in the House of Representatives. With that visibility came increasing job demands and travel, which left Betty to contend with her children's baseball games, Cub Scouts, Brownies, and PTA meetings. Having to contend with these duties, mostly alone, began to take a toll, both physically and mentally. In 1964, she received physical therapy for a painful and inoperable pinched nerve. Just a while later, her doctors told her she had a severe case of osteoarthritis. She later confided to a psychiatrist her feelings of worthlessness, not uncommon to many women of her generation. She would later write, "Their husbands have fascinating jobs, their children start to turn into independent people, and the women begin to feel useless, empty." Attuned to his wife's feelings, Jerry promised his wife that he would seek one more term in 1974, and after that, he would announce his retirement from Congress, and the family would return to Grand Rapids for good. The plan was made, except for one thing: Watergate. In October of 1973, then Vice President Spiro Agnew resigned in a political scandal unrelated to the Watergate cover-up. President Richard Nixon then nominated Gerald Ford to be vice president, and on December 6th, Congressman Ford was sworn in as the new vice president. Events moved quickly in the Watergate scandal. Just 8 months later, on August 9, 1974, following the resignation of Richard Nixon, Gerald R. Ford became the 38th President of the United States, and Betty Ford became the First Lady. That same August 9th, Betty Ford found herself cooking a pan of lasagna in the kitchen of their Alexandria home. She remarked to her husband, "There's something wrong here, Jerry. I'm still cooking and you're the President of the United States." It was that humor, irreverence, and candor that marked Betty Ford's service as First Lady. Along with her husband, she worked hard to reestablish respect for the American presidency. She stated at an international women's meeting, "Being a lady does not require silence." In campaigning for the proposed Equal Rights Amendment to the Constitution, Betty Ford was anything but silent. Those who disagreed with her views picketed the White House. ERA, they asserted, posed a threat to motherhood. "Well, I was a mother," observed Mrs. Ford. "I thought motherhood was swell, but I wasn't so sure mothers shouldn't have rights." In the fall of 1974, doctors in Washington performed a biopsy on a lump in her breast, and cancer was diagnosed. After a radical mastectomy, doctors pronounced her prospect for recovery to be excellent. Betty Ford became the nation's #1 advocate of breast cancer awareness. As one historian remarked, women's health in America can be marked by 2 distinct periods, before Betty and after Betty. Mrs. Ford also embraced the causes of handicapped children and support for the performing arts. By 1976, her approval rating as First Lady was 76%. Following Gerald Ford's unsuccessful bid for the presidency, in 1976, she and Jerry moved to Rancho Mirage, California. But as in Jerry's days in Congress and the White House, his time was spent less and less at home. This further exacerbated Betty's long-term use of alcohol and prescription drugs. Early in 1978, she entered the Long Beach Naval Hospital for treatment. She made no attempt to hide her disease and was outspoken about the challenges of alcoholism and addiction. Soon, she decided to raise funds for a clinic to aid victims of alcohol and chemical dependency and the families of those victims. Since its opening in 1982, the Betty Ford Center has established an international reputation as a leader in the field. President Gerald Ford passed away on December 26, 2006. His beloved Betty passed away on July 8, 2011. Betty Ford's extraordinary legacy endures, for in being herself, Betty Ford inspired millions of women in America and around the world. In 2018, Betty would have celebrated her 100th birthday.
Please welcome Susan Ford Bales.
That's pretty hard to follow. Lena Meijer, Hank and Liesel, Wally Tett, wherever you are, Joe and Donna Calvaruso, and the staff and trustees of Dad's Foundation, Reverend Char, Martha Reeves, Brother Mike, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to a wonderful, lovely luncheon. This is a wonderful celebration of my mother's 100th birthday. Mike and I are extremely grateful to each and every one of you, but most certainly Mom would have been if she were here. Liesel and Hank, thank you for your tireless efforts and generosity. But a special thank you to our friends here at the Meijer Garden. Everything is absolutely beautiful. Thank you. Remarkable events like this don't just happen. They take months and months of hard work. No one, absolutely no one, does it better than the head of my dad's foundation, Joe Calvaruso. Joe and Donna, would you please stand for your and the fellow foundation staff members and trustees. Also with us today are two very special guests. One is a distinguished retired Secret Service agent who protected Lynda's dad and her family, my dad and our family, and the other guests in completing and finishing up Mother's biography, to be released in September, Clint Hill and Lisa McCubbin. I've thought a lot today about how to describe today's remarkable panel. Ladies and gentlemen, it's not been an easy task. But as I've reflected on each panelist, a common thread keeps shining through. And that common thread is captured in a single word: friends. Each of these women, and will always be, a friend of Mom's and a friend of mine. Friendship comes in many forms, but special friends like these three have an amazing gift. They are with you when times are hard, but most of all in a time when Mother and I needed the love of friends during those difficult days following my father's death. One afternoon that week, we were all at Blair House, and on that day, these three women came to Blair House with their husbands to comfort Mom and our family. No fanfare, no press entourage, just dear friends, there to comfort us when we needed them. So to be able to welcome them, these three, to Mom's hometown means more to me than words could ever describe. So it is with a high honor and a personal delight to introduce to you three extraordinary women whose contributions to our country and to the American people are singularly unique. And these three women I am so proud to call my friends. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome America's 67th Secretary of State and former First Lady of the United States, Hillary Rodham Clinton, the former First Lady of Virginia and daughter of President Lyndon B. Johnson, Lynda Johnson Robb, and our moderator today, distinguished NBC journalist Andrea Mitchell.
is not my best side.
Well, it's such a privilege to be here, and Susan, thank you so much. Thanks to the Meijers and all the members of the family, the foundation, the trustees, the wonderful staff here, and to be here with Secretary Clinton and Lynda Johnson Robb is just a great privilege for me. So thank you all. To be considered a friend of Betty Ford is such a high honor. I have my own reflections, but I want to first ask my colleagues here to talk about Betty Ford and the role she played. I was very struck by one of the quotations in that wonderful video. Being a lady does not require silence. Because the term First Lady is archaic in some fashions, and it has been both empowering to many women as they've carved their own way, but also constricting to some who have struggled against the norms. Betty Ford certainly broke out of those strictures, and she took chances. And she was such a role model for me long before I knew her personally. For my generation, which is the same as Hillary Clinton's generation, she was just a striking example, especially the ERA. As a young local reporter, I covered her in Houston, marching with Gloria Steinem and the others in those early marches for equal rights. And for her to do that against the wisdom, quote unquote, of the policy advisors and the politicians in Washington who were in the cabinet and in the White House, she really did all of this in such an extraordinary way. A few other memories that I will share, especially as a breast cancer survivor. I owe so much to Betty Ford. I actually owe so much to her in so many ways, but in particular for her transformation of the way we talk about breast cancer, the way Nancy Reagan was able to talk about breast cancer. So the role of a First Lady, it strikes me that in this era of not only 24-hour cable news, which we all have adjusted to over the last few decades.
Not all of us.
Well, frankly, not even those of us who are purveyors, but the instantaneous challenge of following policy being made on Twitter, frankly, day, night, whatever. I mean, it is challenging, but to carve out policy, to make thoughtful decisions in that climate, but to lead a life in that glass house of the White House. Can you even imagine a First Lady now, a first family being able to survive that onslaught?
Well, I did imagine it, but
Yeah.
But I know exactly what Andrea means, because it has always been a pressure cooker in the White House from the very beginning, when Abigail Adams was hanging up wash in the East Room, and Dolly Madison was rescuing the Gilbert Stuart portrait of George Washington from the advance of the British soldiers during the War of 1812, and so many other stories. And it is such a great personal pleasure for me to be here with all of you in honor of Betty, who, as Andrea rightly said, was someone who I looked up to, who I followed, and who, in my opinion, was one of the most transformational Americans of the last half of the 20th century. I didn't say First Ladies, I said Americans, because of what she did and how she did it. Now, I have to really go back a little bit, though, because Gerald Ford was my first boss in politics. Yes, in the summer of 1968, I was an intern, junior at Wellesley, and tried out for this program where we would spend about 8 weeks in Washington. And I was assigned to the House Republican Conference Committee. And Gerald Ford was the minority leader. And there's a wonderful picture of us somewhere that I'm sure will show up on Twitter or someplace else, where he took pictures with all of the interns. But I will never forget the just the real joy that I had working around him and others who seemed to have the country's best interests at heart. Okay. So fast forward, and when President Ford became President Ford, I, along with the rest of the country, was introduced to Betty Ford. And aside from being beautiful and graceful and gracious and humble and welcoming, she was fierce. I mean, standing up for the ERA, which at that time was not quite as off limits as it later became because of all kinds of efforts against it. But Betty Ford, as the First Lady, speaking out in favor of the Equal Rights Amendment was astonishing. And I was living in Arkansas, and the work that she did was just like a thunderclap. People felt it, believed it, were in awe of it. And I just thought that took so much grit and guts. We all know about her work on behalf of breast cancer because it wasn't just her openness about it. And it was very personal to me because my mother's best friend, a woman who lived across the street from us back in the 60s, pre-Betty, came down with breast cancer and nobody talked about it. And the children, I was friends with her children, and as I say, my mother was over there every afternoon just about. We had no idea what was wrong with her because you just didn't talk about breast cancer then. And she died. And it was only after she died that I learned what she had been going through. So when Betty Ford came along, and that great picture of her in the hospital room with her husband and Bob Hope and that big smile and that perfect hairdo, it was so reassuring and invigorating to have an important person, let alone our First Lady, who was so open and honest and personal about the struggles. But then she went on and she campaigned for better breast cancer treatment. She certainly blew away the stigma, which had stood in the way of women even feeling comfortable getting examinations. I mean, I can't imagine how many lives she saved, directly and indirectly, because of her courage in facing up to her own disease. And then, of course, the lasting work she did on behalf of addiction, alcohol and drugs. Another element of her courage, being so open about what she had suffered from and talking not only about her treatment, but again, working to make treatment available so that, I visited the Betty Ford Center with her years and years ago, and that facility has such a well-earned world-class reputation. And she made that happen. It would not have happened without her. And she could have just given her name to it, but it was more than that. When I was there with her, she knew staff members' names, she knew patients' names. She said to me, well, I can only call them by their first name, But she was so important. And I think that when her biography, which I heard is being written, comes out, new generations of Americans, both young men and young women, will learn more about her life, which in many ways was a shining example of the change in women's lives. And that's the final thing I would say. Seeing her with the Martha Graham Dance Company, it's thrilling. Seeing her then back home and eventually marrying this handsome, young ex-GI who went to Yale Law School, where I went. So there's a lot of remembrance of Jerry Ford at the Yale Law School. And then starting their life, and then him getting elected to Congress, and they're off to the races. never knowing or expecting that history would put him and her in the White House. But boy, am I glad it did. Because although it is controversial in some quarters, I think what Jerry Ford did in pardoning Richard Nixon was an extraordinary act of not only personal generosity and courage, but putting country over party in the most obvious and important way. And our country goes through ups and downs, in case you haven't noticed, and it's really important that we have people with bedrock values who understand what's important, what's lasting, even what's eternal. And luckily, we've had history pluck them out and put them into place, and we had that with both Jerry and Betty Ford. So, thank you.
And that's, you know, Secretary Clinton, you've just sparked a memory, because I remember one night my husband and I were visiting the Fords in Beaver Creek, and we were there for the World Economic Forum, where he had a bipartisan gathering of foreign policy and economic advisors and former leaders, Helmut Schmidt and Giscard d'Estaing and others with whom he had served in what was then the G5, which they really, it was their wisdom to create that organization of great leaders of the Western Alliance and of course Japan. And then we were talking that night, and he had just been chosen for the Profile in Courage Award from the Kennedy Library to be awarded by Caroline Kennedy, or had just received it. And he said to us, he and Betty were talking about that, and he said, "This is the highest honor I could have, because this tells me that we really did the right thing, and that the Kennedy family would choose this award to honor the pardon." And that was what it was for. The Profile in Courage Award was for his decision to pardon Richard Nixon, right, which kind of finally put to rest, for him at least, the controversy. Lynda, it really struck me in watching the video that the Ford family, I hadn't realized fully that with everything that Betty Ford was going through, that Jerry Ford had promised that the '74 campaign would be his last in the House, and that they were thrust into this role of the presidency so suddenly. And you and your family experienced exactly, not exactly, but in tragic terms, the same sudden emergence, not having any time to prepare for that solemn responsibility. How did it affect you as a member of the First Family and your mother?
Well, I went from being the college sophomore at the University of Texas and living in a dorm with 300 girls. Those were the days when women lived in dorms with only women. Very different. Whole new world. But which made it very difficult for the Secret Service. I eventually, this was, as you know, November, I finished out that semester at the university, and during that time, the girls did not like the intrusion of the Secret Service, so and I was on the 3rd floor, and so some of the young ladies would, they tried to put cameras up there, and Secret Service did, and they would hang their unmentionables on the cameras to block them, because of course they were used to going off to the bathrooms not fully dressed. They also began to take the Secret Service into their confidence, because at night, you have to really imagine this. This was in the olden days. We had to be in by like maybe 10 o'clock at night. They locked the doors. So they locked the Secret Service in and all the other men out. So the other people at Coinciding would go down and commiserate. You know, what did you think about John? And they would get their advice on dating. And they'd bring their boyfriends around. And then they would make food for them. And all of the 3 Secret Service men, well, they all gained weight. They all, my parents said that I would be such a great help if I would come to Washington. Please, couldn't I come to Washington and help poor mother in her duties? You know, I could be there to go when she was out of town to give guided tours, and I could be the hostess. Well, I know full well that it was because, 1, the Secret Service were getting too fat. 2, there was, you know, you have to remember, as Susan does, there are some scary things that happen. So they wanted to have me under their roof. It would be a lot easier than having me back in Coinciding dorm where, who knows? And there were people in Texas who didn't like us too. We were pretty controversial for a lot of those people. And so I did come back up, but my life changed completely. I mean, when I was down at the university, I remember when I went in as a freshman, one of the women who was a real star on campus, a beauty, someone said to her, you know, the vice president's daughter is going to be in Coinciding. To which she said, the vice president of what? And that was frequently. I mean, nobody paid any attention to the vice president. I expect that if you had asked, there might have been a few who would have been able to name my father, but not very many. And so when tragedy hit, I was isolated. I was in Austin by myself. And amazingly enough, somebody managed to find a plane to fly Bess Abel and some of the staff back to Washington, but nobody thought about me. And I ended up coming commercial several days later. But it changed my life completely. And but the amazing thing that I looked at, all those pictures up there, was how many times I interacted with Betty Ford. Just me, poor little me. And I got to go and see her and do all these things. And she came to my house. I mean, after she had been First Lady, she came to my house. That was very exciting. And we kind of campaigned for ERA together. There's a wonderful picture, and it was in Houston at the Women's Year, and there I am at the end of the line, but you have Mrs. Carter and Mrs. Ford and my mother, and then I was the chair of the President's Advisory Committee for Women, and so I got up on the podium too, but it was very exciting. I mean, I knew we were doing something great. Now, let me just tell you, I was the First Lady of Virginia later. Well, actually, yes, later I was First Lady. And I asked Hillary Rodham if she would join the committee. And we had, talk about women, Hillary said she had just had a baby. And thank you so much, but I just think I have to stay home and take care of my little girl. And I thought, you know, she has developed since then. Now, mind you, I had been chosen for this job Because guess what? I was safe. I was succeeding Bella Abzug, who President Carter had to shuffle off the position. But I had just had a baby too. So they couldn't accuse me of being, anti-mothering. And my husband was lieutenant governor. And so his staff came to him and said, this will not be good for your chances running for governor if your wife heads up this women's board. And then to make it even worse, I got involved with ERA, which I'm sorry to say did not pass. We did not make it in Virginia. We almost did. And then at the last minute, this person who had committed and whose wife was marching with me, he later divorced her. But really.
That sort of captures the continual conflict.
It does.
By the time Hillary Clinton was First Lady, you broke so many barriers, but one of the big ones, and I was on that trip with you, was when you went in 1995 to Beijing to the Women's Conference. The State Department did not want the First Lady to talk about foreign policy. I don't think the National Security Council staff did either. The final speech was worked on the plane, I think with Lissa Muscatine, your speech writer and a great woman and a former journalist, in fact, who worked on that speech. Women's rights are human rights and human rights are women's rights. And that was so controversial. The Chinese were very hostile to this and hostile to the whole delegation, Donna Shalala and a lot of other women in the delegation. But that was such an important role, and it certainly indicated, as did a lot of other trips, 80 trips as First Lady overseas, 112 as Secretary of State, as I recall, different countries, but 80 different countries as First Lady. Let me ask you about what's going on now with the State Department, because it's a place you love, and foreign policy, obviously from all your life, has been a big role, a big part in your life. A lot of us are concerned. This is not a Republican or a Democratic issue. This is an issue of American projection of foreign policy abroad. We have a new nominee. He's got to have his confirmation hearing. And according to reports yesterday, he's called you for advice. If you could speak just broadly about your advice on that.
Well, I love Lynda's story because there was a lot of activity around women's issues. And after the ERA failed, I think there was a high level of discouragement and surprise.
No question about it.
Because, so many of the arguments against enshrining women's rights in our Constitution were, pretty far-fetched, but they got an audience. And so we began in our own country knocking down barriers, beginning to change laws. I really think everybody who cares about women's equality should give, thanks to Ruth Bader Ginsburg, because as a young lawyer, and then as an established lawyer before she became a Supreme Court Justice, she brought a lot of those cases. I mean, I can remember, I was practicing law. My husband was Attorney General. The Attorney General of Arkansas made, as I recall, $15,000 a year. I was making somewhat more than that as a lawyer, and I applied for a credit card. And this was probably 1977, 78, around the time of the Houston conference. And I was told I could not get a credit card in my own name, that I had to get it through my husband. Now, that seems like ancient history, but those of us sitting up here remember that. And so the move to knock down barriers so that young girls could play sports with Title IX and so much else really did begin a move toward legal equality in our own country. But meanwhile, around the world, that was a distant dream. And if you traveled over the last 30, 40 years, and you could see with your own eyes in much of the rest of the world, the denial of opportunity and rights to girls and women. It was not only something that was personally shocking and troubling, but it also provoked some very important research which demonstrated how women's empowerment and women's opportunities are connected to growing economies, growing middle classes, improving the prospects for sustainable democracy, and very often when dictatorial or authoritarian regimes come into being, they begin to try to either first by sarcasm and dismissiveness denigrate women, and then they move toward trying to tighten the roles that women can play in the larger society. I say all that because when I went to Beijing, I mean, I told my husband, I told the White House, I said that, you know, the United States needed to be in the forefront of advocating for women's rights around the world. It was in our interest, it was in our national security interests. I believe that passionately. And I was invited to speak at Beijing, and I wanted to go, and Andrea's absolutely right. Nobody else wanted me to go. So it took really my husband saying to his foreign policy team, you know, I agree with her. I think we should be on the forefront. So I went, and the Chinese were very unhappy at my speech, and they cut off the sound throughout the giant convention center so that it would be broadcast. It wasn't covered in the Chinese press, but here's an interesting post story. I got an email about 2 years ago from a friend of mine who was shopping at a huge department store in Beijing, and they had Muzak, but then they had my speech. Wow. And nobody could believe it, including me, and thinking like, what subversive person stuck that speech in there? But I think that even the Chinese government understood that if they were going to continue their economic drive, forget about their political positioning right now, if they were going to continue their economic drive, they couldn't leave half the population out. And that is what, you know, most countries that are looking very much in their own self-interest about the economy believe. So when I became Secretary of State, following on the heels of our second woman Secretary of State, Condi Rice, and my dear, dear friend, Madeleine Albright, I thought it was important that we continue to elevate the importance, the role of women. So we did that, and it made a big difference, and we, I think, benefited from it. But the question that Andrea is asking now is one that should concern every American, regardless of party or ideology. The State Department projects our power and our values around the world. They also do things like help you out if you need a visa, or you lose your passport when you're traveling, or you know, someone you know dies and you've got to get the body back. I mean, there's a lot of nuts and bolts practical work that is also carried out. And I'm distressed, in fact, I'm just really deeply worried that in the last year and a half, we have driven from the State Department some of the most qualified foreign service officers and civil service officers. We have sort of shut down the pipeline for young people. And why does that matter? Well, because there are certain skills, language skills. You know, when I became secretary in 2009, we were still desperate to build up our Arabic language skills, our Urdu, our Pashto, our Dari. I mean, places where we were fighting wars and we didn't have enough people who could understand what was happening in the countries where we were putting our military and our diplomats. So when you just wholesale try to purge the State Department, not with any thoughtful reform, because I had the first really comprehensive reform that I put into place to, you know, think about what the State Department needed to be, to streamline it, to, you know, really try to, you know, make it more efficient, but within the constraints of recognizing, you know, we do need people who speak these languages and know these cultures and understand these histories. In the unit that is supposed to be combating Russian propaganda in our country, we have no Russian speakers. Now, it's pretty hard to combat Russian propaganda or to track it on the internet, because part of how you track it is you understand the linguistic mistakes they make, and you can track it back. When we think about what we have to do with North Korea, we really cleaned, the administration cleaned house in getting rid of people with Korean language skills and prior experience with the North Koreans, and the list goes on. So I'm hopeful, yes, as Andrea said, the new nominee, Mike Pompeo, who's been serving for the last, I guess, 18 months or so at the CIA, called me. Now, for any of you who followed the Benghazi hearings, all 9 of them, that might surprise you, because, he certainly went after me, to no avail, I might add, but nevertheless he did. And so he called me and wanted to talk about the State Department, and I was happy to talk to him because, I think we got to get back to talking to each other, and more importantly, listening to each other. And we can't allow the partisanship and the politicization of everything to interfere with our national interests. And I told him that I thought he should take a hard look at retaining career diplomats who could advise him, because you never know what might happen. You have no idea where the next hot spot or crisis will come from. So I don't have any idea as to whether he will be confirmed or anything he would do if he were. But I think it's important to say, look, we got to get back on a more balanced path in order to protect our interests and to really represent the United States effectively around the world, and that comes primarily out of the State Department.
Well, I think I know we have very little time, but I just wanted to say that in the spirit that Susan suggested, all of us have valued friendship and the connections among women. And what Betty Ford did was make it possible to create a whole new way of viewing the First Lady. I think if she were a younger woman in this generation, she would be doing so many amazing, exciting things, but building on her passion for helping those who are fighting addictions and creating new opportunities for women in all arenas, and also, importantly, women's health. Just one word to what Hillary Clinton mentioned. I went for my mammograms to the Betty Ford Mammogram Center at GW Hospital and in Washington, D.C. And it was from that I found out in a very early way, which is not affordable to many women in our society, but to many more because of Betty Ford, making mammograms and early detection available. And that is why I am as strong and healthy as I am almost 7 years later. I am grateful to her for the love and the legacy and the traditions that she created, the possibilities she opened up for women all over the world, in my generation and in younger generations. But for these women who knew her far better than I and were connected to her in different ways, it's so apparent that the life of public service is among the highest possible goals of citizenship. And it's possible now for women as well as men in ways that I had never imagined when I was growing up. So thank you so much, Hillary Clinton. Thank you, Lynda Johnson Robb. Thank you, Susan Ford Bales. And thanks to all of you and to the woman we honor today. An amazing century. Thank you.
parting gift to all of you from us.
Oh my gosh.
Oh, my goodness.
The flowers are already, I mean, the
This is for you,
flowers
Andrea,
are
excuse me.
extraordinary.
Okay, well, I'll tell you about those in a
Everything
second.
about,
That's so good. It's so nice. I just celebrated my 50th wedding anniversary.
congratulations.
Secretary Clinton. These are made by a friend of mine, and I'll match.
Could have used this a few days ago.
Susan?
Are we supposed to get and leave now? Susan's going to come.
Thank you, Susan. Yeah, thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, if we could all have a round of applause for our amazing, wonderful guest today. Wonderful.
Really nice.
Okay. Yeah, thank you, my dear.
Thank you all.
If you could please remain in your seats, if you would all please take your seats as our honored guests leave. We can clap again if you'd like as they're exiting. Thank you all so much. I'd like you to remain for a moment for 3 reasons. Number 1 is safety. I'm a mom and a former professor, so I'm going to use my mom professor voice. Safety. We are doing a bit of construction here at Meijer Gardens, as you might have noticed. So we have one sort of central exit, one entrance. And for safety's sake, we're going to wait until their motorcade is well on its way to leave. As you exit, there will be volunteers with baskets for your badge. You can just drop those in very easily. Okay? That's the safety and courtesy part. But first, something exciting. So every year we have centerpieces. Our flowers, everywhere you look, spring is here. This was created by Nathan Veneman. Nathan, where are you? My dear Nathan? There he is. So everything you see created around you by Nathan. So we have to get trickier and trickier every year to try to figure out who wins the centerpiece, right? Because you're always looking for stickers now or a certain... Ha! We fooled you. Okay, so, this gets really good. You have a pen. Everybody has a pen, right? So we are going to actually make you write something. Now you could, oh gosh, how do we do that? You could pull out that wonderful donation card. And any donations that you make today will be given to support educational programs at the Gerald R. Ford Foundation, Presidential Foundation. But here's the fun part. If your pen writes in blue or black, this is not your lucky day to win the centerpiece. But if your pen writes in pink, you win the centerpiece. So just make a smiley face, write your name, or write a big check. And if it writes in pink, did you win? Okay. If you, I know. You gotta fill it out a little bit. Okay, we have some winners. Okay. So if you won the centerpiece and you would like help in carrying it to your vehicle, if you would like it wrapped, Nathan can help you with that, Nathan and his team. Okay? I know. How can we top this, right? Okay. Couple more things before you go. So if you need help with the centerpiece, please feel free to ask. I'd like to thank, I know, it's so exciting. Everybody gets very excited about the flowers. Okay? I need to thank a core group of people. This did not happen overnight. I need to thank, first and foremost, Nathan and Suzanne Veneman, his mother. With that, we worked so incredibly hard on everything you see around you. Joe and Donna Calvaruso, Joe and Donna. And here at Gardens, Anne Marie Smart. And she's gone now, but Susan Ford Bales too. It was an amazing journey to get here. Last but not least, thank all of you so much for coming. And, you know, I joke about where you came up with the pen, but hey, it is a good time. You can take it home. I know sometimes it thinks it, but you might need to think about if you want to join, donate, whatever it is. But please know how much we appreciate your presence today. Your support of this event is incredibly meaningful. If you have far to drive, please be safe. Enjoy the rest of your day. Spring is here. And I think just in absentia, why don't we have one last round of applause for really an amazing, amazing group of women today. Program is officially closed. You may stay and enjoy the gardens. Have a wonderful rest of your day. Thank you so much for coming.